Anyway, so for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, the idea that all of us basically have failed, all of us have come up short, all of us are recipients of grace, and mercy, and all these tremendous things. And sort of Paul is finalizing this discussion before he gets into the first two verses of Romans 12, which to me are kind of the peak of the book of Romans. But it's important that we recall that for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, and we all basically have come up just shy of where we're supposed to be. Just a tad shy. And so Paul kind of ends it as he starts to talk about this dichotomy, this seemingly intense contradiction. And he sums it all up in one sentence. We've all heard the story of sort of the black and the white wolf, right? It's kind of a famous story about, which dog is more powerful in your life, evil or good. And it's the one that you feed, right? It's the one that you give to. It's the one that you, the one that you're constantly lifting up, the one that you're constantly nourishing is going to be the one that wins the battle in your life. And you can sit there and say, no, I can feed the evil, but good will always triumph. Well, that's not true in your own life. It's really whichever one that you're feeding the most. There's an author who wrote a book a few years back. His name is John Ortberg. It's not really for everybody because it's basically dealing with sort of the concept of leadership and kind of who you're supposed to be as a leader. But he wrote this excellent book called Overcoming Your Shadow Mission. The idea behind Ortberg's book is very simple, that every leader has a mission and every leader has a shadow mission. Now, it doesn't mean, it sounds all cool and, Black Ops, but it's really, a pretty basic premise. The book's better, in terms of when you get into it in depth, but he talks about this idea that all of us have this sort of mission that God's put us on. We have this purpose. And we're designed for a directive, that we're all designed for a mission. Sometimes we have to go through self-discovery in those things, sometimes we go through growth, sometimes we have to go through training, but we're all sort of designed to kind of be on this mission. But if you get distracted, if you begin to sort of kind of populate your life like the black dog, if you begin to populate your life with stuff that distracts you from the mission, you will ultimately live out what John calls your shadow mission, which is not necessarily meant to be so far offline. Like I think in the book he references about 10%, 10 degrees of difference, that it doesn't take much for you to get off track. That we all sort of continually walk in this battling dichotomy that is both good and evil, that is both what we know, whether it's our Christian worldview or basically our understanding of sort of the scriptural meta-narrative, what God wants. And then there's this part of us that also wants to go live in destruction of it, even though it may not look like it on the surface. So Ortberg kind of goes over that a lot in the book. Like I said, if you're in leadership of any kind, it's a really interesting book. If you don't really care about leadership, you're probably bored to tears. So, but the idea is that there's this sort of, dichotomous relationship of what's inside of us. And they can be working simultaneously, is his primary argument. And then ultimately, though, it will begin to shift to whichever direction you begin to feed, you begin to buy into. One of the things I always used to say in youth ministry, is where your mind is, your heart will soon follow. That your heart can be true in nature and good and just, but if your mind is constantly inundated with negativity, and your mind is constantly inundated with the things that are not of God, sooner or later your heart's going to go there. It's the argument about mankind's sin in the garden. I believe mankind sinned long before he ever ate of any fruit, because you can't be tempted with what you don't already want. And if you want evil, then you've already committed it. Jesus was pretty clear on that. So I bring all this up, it's kind of at the beginning, to talk about this. We all live in this sort of seeming contradiction sometimes in our own lives, and we accept it in ourselves. Paul basically puts out this really I think a tremendous combination. So first of all, in verse 22, it says, therefore consider the kindness of God. Now I put an asterisk because I'm pulling out a couple of words first, without hurting the integrity of the word kindness. Okay, so no one begin to question my contextual, manipulation. Therefore consider the kindness of God. So kindness, what a great word. Having or showing a friendly, generous, and considerate nature. I think that is a fantastic definition of kindness. When you think of a kind person, we think of that person. Friendly, generous, considerate. Then we add to it affectionate and loving. This is just beautiful. This person we want to hang out with, right? And then also one of my favorite is it's also used in a polite request. Would you be so kind as to pass the sugar? So kindness is one of those words that is kind of, it's become quite big. We have begun to sort of link kindness and decency. Be a decent person means be a kind person. We don't really have a view of where that kindness is linked in terms of what we believe. We don't have conviction. We don't have resolve. We don't have a lot of ways that we look at kindness. We love this definition of kindness. And we've sort of reached this point where everything's about being kind. Be kind always. It's become this discussion. And one of my favorites was, I did a couple of really good, just search images on Google. So these next two things are two of the most fantastic images for kindness. One, this person planting hearts and growing love. When I think of a kind person, I think of that person walking along and planting hearts. It's beautiful. Come on now. Can't we use more people planting hearts?
Looks like the Lombardi.
A little bit, I guess. Here's another one. This one in and of itself seems to be both kind and mean. Right? Random acts of kindness. It does seem a little weird to shield the plant from the water which feeds it, but other than that, who am I to judge? That's called not being kind, everyone. So I was looking at these just wonderful images because they denote this yes, if only the world was more of this guy or that guy, right?
How do you know they're guys?
Huh?
How do you know they're guys?
Because men sow hearts into the ground. And the Bible says men are forced to toil in the garden. See? Yeah, those are both men right there.
Okay.
And only a man would
That's a little
do that.
Sorry for this.
So kindness in geometry, very simple. You cannot love without kindness. So if you are kind, then you are loving. If you are loving, then you are kind. And if you are loving, then if and only if you are kind. That is how geometry works. Those are called biconditionals. I work with them all the time. You're all jealous. I know. But this is kind of how we look at kindness. I share all the time with the students that I teach that one of the biggest problems in the church has become the disease of Christian kindness. Because we've become so overwhelmed with being kind that we've forgotten the other side. We've become so overwhelmed with it's okay, it's great, I think it's wonderful, let's hug this thing out, okay, which I honestly have never said. Well, let's hug this thing out. It's great, I'm all for it, but one of the problems that we have is that kindness has sort of become our modus operandi. That if someone comes in and they are absolutely doing something that is in complete contrast to the church, complete contrast to what God believes, we will step back sometimes in this desire to be kind and go, it's okay. So when Paul says, consider the kindness of God, Paul balances it with this other word, sternness. So remember where I had the little parentheses with the asterisk? And sternness is the inclusion in that phrase. So we have consider the kindness, which we have this definition of what being kind is. And then we have, and the sternness of God. So he says, consider both the kindness and sternness of God. This is a strong word. Now, it's probably not a word that you guys use very often in your lives anymore. We prefer the word kind. Right? We don't like the word stern. Because stern, probably for most of us, denotes a teacher that we didn't so much appreciate. A father who was very, very hard on us. Right? I don't know that mothers are often considered stern. Maybe, I guess, if they're really pushing the rules. But usually we don't denote sternness with somebody that we are like, oh, you know what? I love hanging out with them. Why? They're so stern. Right? Like nobody says that. Well, maybe you say that. I mean, there's that one great commercial with the guy hitting his head on the board, and I guess there are people who like weird things. But it's, you know, if I give you a choice and say, okay, you can hang out with person A, who's kind, or you can hang out with person B, who's stern, it's going to be a short line if you're B. Right? It doesn't mean that you don't have tons and tons of value, but it's going to be a short line if you're B. So Paul sort of basically exposes us to this dichotomy. So here we have these two pigeons. I like this. I don't know where the thesaurus came up with this, but I enjoyed perusing some of these the other day. What are other words for sternness? So let's go through our list of things we love. 1, strictness. Well, how many of us like to be called strict? Right. Some of us like those moments, right? When, because like the kids in school always go, more homework? And I go, why? And I go, because I'm a jerk. And that's my response to everything. Why are we doing this? Because I'm a jerk. You know, because I feel like I'm just sort of cutting them off the pass. So strictness, most of us don't like that. Severity. There's a severity about their spirit. How many of us would love that to be said about us, right? Most of us would be like, oh, I want to be lighthearted, fun, kind, loving, decent, right? I want to be that person. Hardness. Okay, it's getting worse, right? And you start going through it, right? Rigidity. How many of us would love to be defined as rigid? You know why I love you? Because you're so rigid. Right? And you're like, thank you. Thank you for being so kind. Right? And appreciating my rigidness. Rigidity. Rigidiation. In the Greek, you can add any suffix prefix to any word and still a word, so take that.
Yeah.
And Greek's has been around a lot longer than English, which is based in Latin. That's why it doesn't work. Harshness. How many of us love to have people judge our harshness? Right? Man, that's harsh. Thank you. You're welcome. Right? I mean, that's what I would love to hear more like on the football field, but I don't hear that from the players very often. Right? Coach, you know I love you? You're so harsh on us. Thanks, man. And I'm like, you're welcome, youngster. Right? No, that's not how it works, right? So harshness. You know, obviously I would sit on this all day long. But so we see all this, and then we kind of get into what kind of a world of definitions, right? So when we look at the definition of stern, okay, having a definite hardness or severity of nature or manner. Okay, so remember what Paul said. Consider the kindness, which we went through kindness, right? Loving, affectionate, considerate. And sternness, hardness, severity, right? Expressive of severe displeasure. Oh, no. That's not God. Right? God never is hard on anyone. He's never expressive of severe displeasure. Right? I read that in a book called We're Okay by Captain Christian, and that's not a book. It doesn't really exist. Elijah, don't look it up. He's over there on Amazon. Really, sounds like a fun book. I would like to read that. You have it on tape. Anyway, so expressive of severe displeasure, right? So that's a harsh one. Forbidding or gloomy in appearance. How many of us would love that to be a definition of our sternness? You look very stern today. Thank you. No, I mean that. You look very gloomy. Right? That doesn't sound like fun. So we love that kind God, right? We want to go to a kind church. We like people who have principles and values as long as they're kind about them. Right? It's okay for you to believe what you believe as long as you're kind about it. We hear that all the time in our society. If you exist on any social media platform, everyone wants you to be kind. One of the great defenses is always, well, or you could be a kind person. Instead of taking that rigid stance, right? So we sort of exist in this sort of world of common belief. So if we take some liberty with the definition and we understand it's an unwavering commitment to belief or belief system. God is stern, right? He's unwavering in what he knows. He's unwilling to bend for the exception. That's tough for us. Because I hear people tell me all the time that, God would never do that because of so-and-so's circumstances. And I always respond with, right, that would not be the fair thing to do. But God's not fair. Nowhere does it go, thank you, Jesus, for giving all of us our own set of rules based on our skill set. I was talking this week about the parable of the talents. And one of the hardest things for people to understand is everybody seems to look at it as sort of, I get it on the surface, right? Except that one got 10, one got 1. It was easier for the 10 to risk than for the 1. But it doesn't change it. The circumstances did not give the 1 an excuse. Or, I understand. I don't appreciate you doing that, but I get it. Let's hug this thing out. Right? No, it's basically, no, this is what was done. This is the way it's built. One of the things I say all the time when in football is when kids, one of the reasons I don't like running laps is because laps are unfair on the big fellas. Right? The little running backs are all, and the big boy in the back, is weeping, right? And we have this big boy in our program who cries when he runs laps. It's absolutely, it's adorable. Every time he runs by, he's like, I'm like, I don't know, man. Lay off the cheese puffs. He's a big fella. See, that was not kind, but it was stern. Does not require affirmation. If you are stern, you are not looking for someone to affirm you, right? If you are a stern leader, you're not going, someone please tell me I'm doing a good job. No, you are aware of the fact you are stern. And finally, rules must be followed, not adjusted. That is one of the biggest things if you are a stern person. I don't care. Now, this is one of the areas where I was never that person until I started, this little hobby of mine, teaching in school. And it's still a hobby. And because I'm still figuring it out. But it's funny because I was not this person. I was like, yeah, turn in your homework when you get around to it. It's cool. This year, they're like, hey, can I turn it late? I'm like, no. Why? I don't know. I just don't want to do the work over the weekend. So it's not even by the end of class, you get a 0. And the kids are like, that's unfair. I'm like, I know. I'm a jerk. Right? They're like, last year you let us turn things in whenever. And I'm like, I know. I was nice. You took advantage of it. You ruined me. It's not that hard. I think it makes sense, And if all of you think I'm kidding, this is exactly how I talk. You can ask my son. He's in one of my classes. Exactly how I talk. And why do we have to do this? Because you destroyed my goodness. And they will come up to, they'll say, I don't get it. I'll be like, I was listening in class. I'm like, I don't care. I really don't. You look like you were sleeping. But I was listening. Don't care. And I said, well, then sit up and listen. Don't lay down. I'm like, seriously, I don't care. I've become this rules must be followed, not adjusted person. And every now and then I'll make up rules as I go along. I have no problem whatsoever. Can I eat in your class? No. Can I? Sure. They're eating something that's worth eating. You're eating fruit. Rules must be followed, not adjusted. This is how I live. This is my life. This is how I exist. But this is kind of that sternness where we always look at God and we think you have to adjust your rules because you're a kind and loving God. You give grace and mercy because you realized we could not do it. And therefore your grace and mercy is limitless and I can keep doing whatever I want. Because the truth is that, I think some of us look at God like that parent at Target. If we throw a hissy fit in the aisle because we want a toy and the parent goes, okay, I'll buy you a toy so you quit throwing a hissy fit. That's kind of how we act sometimes. We think that God's going, okay, well, I have to give it to you because you're acting, you're acting so poorly and I don't want to notice, and so I'm going to buy you this toy, which, by the way, is a good decision. We've all learned that. Right? Given your kid screaming, and life will be better for it. But we have this idea that somehow God's looking at us going, well, I get that you can't do it, so I'm going to keep extending to you all these options. I'm going to keep doing this. And because that's what a kind and loving God would do, right? We have erased hell from our vocabulary because a kind and loving God would never do that. And there's no biblical proof that God would do that. Right? That's the argument. And we step back and we say that God would never. And I sit there and I say, why do you think that? Have you not read the Old Testament?
I know.
And so many people sit there and say, well, God would never. And one of my favorites is people say life is sacred. And I always go, it is? Where do you read that? Where do you read that in the Bible? And people say, oh. And I'm saying, I'm just asking you for proof. You're the one who makes the statement. And I sit there and I talk to these, I get hours every week to ruin young people, right? And it's great when it comes to our Bible class. Because I sit there and I just look at them and they go, well, why do you think that? And they'll say something, well, what about this? And I'll go, well, where do you find that proof? And they go, stop answering my question with questions. And I say, I always tell them, I said, no, the burden of proof is on you. And so many people right now, they have this idea that a loving God would never. A kind God would never. And I sit there and say, where are you reading about a God who would never? Where is this one? Paul says, listen, it's kindness and it's sternness, right? C.S. Lewis said, love is something more stern and splendid than mere kindness. So when you start talking about this combination of where does stern come in, stern is the loving part, too. It's not like kindness way over here is one thing, and sternness is this dichotomy on the other. Love requires a stern nature. Love requires rules, guidelines. Love requires you do something. Love requires action. Love requires an expectation, a responsibility. Love asks a lot out of us who are doing the loving and out of those that we are trying to love, if we can. Being kind is much easier, right? I can be decent, I can be decent, I can be decent, but loving is actually involved in the sternness. Because then Paul says this, sternness, so this is where the verse continues. Sternness to those who fell, but kindness to you, provided you continue in his kindness, otherwise you will be cut off. Bro, no. That's not what a kind and decent and loving God would do. That is way too harsh. Except that he chose Israel. Israel was not worthy. Israel was not special. Israel was not exceptional until God said, I choose you. And then Israel became this conduit for the message, became this beginning, this birth of the redemptive narrative, that we read about in the Bible through the people of Israel. And every time they messed up, right? Right? It's like Yan Can Cook, man. It just suck up, and move the bell pepper over. I said, oh, come on back when you figure things out. If you read the story of Exodus and you go through the Pentateuch and you really take in some of that stuff and you read all these great stories, God was not slow with his sternness, because that's how you teach love. When we look at our children, and all of us who have successfully or unsuccessfully, taught lessons to our children over the years, we sit there and we watch other parents, right? Because that's what we do. We say we don't judge, but we totally do. Right? And we're watching these parents with these kids, and there's always that one parent where you just sit there and watch and go, what are you doing? Where you're trying to negotiate with your 3-year-old. No. I don't want to have to put you in time. Don't make me take away. And you're like, tag. Right? Like you're in the corner like some WWF wrestler. I got this one, right? I'll take care of you. I'll take care of it. I'll make sure your kid gets the rules. It's probably not going to be a lot of negotiating, right? And when Israel makes a mistake, and Moses comes down the mountain, and they're worshiping a golden cow, like you do, and they're worshiping this golden cow, and Moses goes, ha-ha! And breaks the commandments, all 15 of them if you're into Mel Brooks movies. And he goes back up the hill, right? God does not go, well, let's be honest, you were gone a long time. Right? I mean, you were gone a long time, Moses. Let's sit them down and let's just talk. Let's see what drove them to that doubt. Let's see where they were coming from emotionally, and maybe see if we can't figure out a way to make sure you're maybe not gone so long next time. See if that works first, okay? So rather than put Israel in timeout, right? Which God does later, right? 40-year timeout, but he doesn't do that. He says, okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to take all that gold, we're going to crunch it up, and we're going to make you eat it. Okay, that's not cool. Right? Not even one warning, right? Because you can't punish me unless I get a warning. That's the rule that I just made up. But we see throughout the Old Testament, this is exactly how it is. Peter is so audacious as to say, "You don't have to die, Jesus," and he gets called Satan. Maybe I would love for some of our tremendous, wonderful communicators of today's day and age to have been there. Maybe Jesus, maybe not Satan, okay? Maybe call Peter, maybe a man with doubts, right? Because that's harsh. And now you have stunted his discipleship. And he will never again be able to be discipled because you called him Satan. But that's kind of how it is, right? I mean, that's the world we live in, because that's the kindness that controls us. And we forget about this relationship, this tremendous, vast spectrum of who God is, and we limit him down to the stuff that either we like, the stuff that we understand, the stuff that allows us to maybe not be in so much trouble when we're talking to our friends when they try to corner us on things that we believe as Christians. And so we work so hard to focus on that part of God that is acceptable. And we ignore the part of God that isn't. Like what John Ortberg was talking about. We have two missions in our lives, right? We have that really great, awesome thing that we're going to do for God. And then there's this other thing that's just kind of just off the path that ultimately is destructive. We don't want to acknowledge that one. We never want to admit that that's in us. That's in all of us. Because we sort of grab bag. Now with God, we're not grab bagging good over evil. With God, we're grab bagging, culturally and community acceptance over truth. We're grab bagging kindness over sternness, because it's so much easier to invite our friends to a church that focuses on the kindness part, that focuses on the grace part, the mercy part. We don't want to. It would be very hard to look at your friend and go, "You should come to church this week." We've been doing a 7-week series on the sternness of God. No one would come. Even if I said, "You have to be here, it's the rule." You would go, "Watch me." Right? Because it does not appeal. We don't like to think about it. And for good reason. We love grace, we love mercy, we love love, right? We love kindness. We love all these aspects, but really in one sentence, Paul captures the entirety. God is not kind because we deserve kindness. God is kind by choice. To be kind to his creation. He does not have to be kind to his creation. And he's also stern in that he does cut off. Because remember, this metaphor, as we talked about last week, is the grafting of the branches. And so he says, and if they do not persist in unbelief, they will be grafted back in. For God is able to graft them in again. So Paul says, listen, Israel can come back to the vine. Israel can come back to the trunk. Israel can come back to the olive tree if they do not continue in their unbelief or their disbelief. But he's also saying, don't forget that if you're not special because you were grafted in. God chose to do that. It doesn't make you special. And if you choose to not believe, if you choose to rebel, he'll just and chuck you to the side. And we sit there and say, not a loving God. No. David Crowder says he never lets go. He sang it. It was beautiful. It never happens, right? Grace wins every time. We sang it. It's real. And so we have this thing. And like I said, none of that is bad. Except that, man, it takes us away from being honest about who God is. And we forget this sternness. So, oops. I'm going to put that back up again. There we go. So we sit there, we see kindness was given to those who did not deserve acceptance. Sternness was for those who rejected. But God's kindness comes with sternness. And his sternness comes with kindness. But it does not mean that the sternness goes away. One of the things that's so amazing is how hard people have it. I was talking to Lisa about this a little bit last night, but we have this tremendous young man who works so hard with us. Well, one of the lines that he struggles with crossing when it comes to working with young people is he tries so hard to be their friend. And I get it. I was victim of the same thing. I did the same thing when I was young. You want so hard to you think that that's sort of your avenue in to bring change. Is I'm going to go be their buddy. And you forget that the time's going to come when you have to be stern. And one of the hardest things about being stern with your buddy is that they don't look at you as the conduit of sternness. As parents, we make the same mistake, right? When we try to treat our kids as our best friends. Now, granted, it's different as they get to be adults. Obviously that's a different road. But when they're young and you're working hard and you're sitting there and you're saying to yourself, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to be my son's best friend. He's my buddy, and we've got music when we go, and that's all good. Except that sometimes when you step back for a second and go, hey, no. And your kid keeps going, pushing around you, and you're thinking, what are you doing here, bro? I'm the dad. I remember the first time Marcus came home, and he's like, what's up, bro? Mom. One of your friends here? Dude. But it's I get it. It's part of this thing. And it's like, as parents are like, oh, it's just great, they love to be around. Except that the time's going to come when you have to be stern. And how many of you are stern with your best friends in life? No, you will live by the rules. Right? When your friend comes over to the house and breaks a rule, and you're like, no, not my house. Get out. Right? No, it doesn't work that way. And so, yeah, you guys.
That's why I don't have any friends.
So everyone needs a friend. We could get him somebody who appreciates rules and lives by his. But it's this idea that we don't understand that that's the relationship we're setting up, and that both kindness and sternness are possible destinations for the future. He says, look, you're gonna get kindness until you don't. You're gonna get goodness until you don't. Until you choose disbelief. And if you fail to live up to your responsibility, you're going to be cut off. And my encouragement out of this verse is that this has always been one of my absolute favorite verses, because you can sit and think about those two words in conjunction with each other forever. Kindness and sternness. But ultimately, what I always tell my athletes, what I always tell them is, I'm stern, and you'll realize why on Saturday. You know, you may look at it and go, I don't understand why you're working, why this is so hard. I don't understand why you say the things you do. I don't understand why you're constantly criticizing what we do. And I always sit there and say, just wait till Saturday. And then they go out on Saturday and they whoop people. And then they come back and they're all smiles and they're all cheering up and down. And I go, that's not a result of my kindness. Your victory is not a result of my kindness. My kindness brought me out here. My kindness made this relationship acceptable, possible. My kindness opened this door. Your receiving of my kindness is what makes this work for you, because I don't need you to be me. So, but your response to my kindness makes this work. My sternness, my expectation, and my love for you, which allows me to be critical, which allows me to be tough, which allows me to be hard on you, is what ultimately is going to help you win. Not the other way around. And I'm hard on you because I care. And I know kids, sometimes they look at us and they think, I don't get it, that's not true, there's no way. Being hard on me cannot be because you love me. But that's where our sternness pushes through, and we say that stuff to God all the time. I don't get why this is so hard. And he's looking at us going, it's hard because I love you. I make it tough because you need discipline. I make it tough because you need to walk that path rightly. And it's not easy. And I'm not going to let you wander off over here for a while and not suffer some fallout. It's the same thing when you're coaching or teaching or leading or at work. If you have a group of people that you oversee that you have an expectation that they have to get stuff done. Projects and work and distribution or whatever. You have all these things and you know that it's like, listen, this is the direction we're going. And I'm going to high five you when we get there, but I'm going to make sure we get there first. And I'm not going to suffer you wandering off without some kind of discipline. And sometimes it's tough because sometimes you have to make a decision. Are you going to be cut off? Or am I going to leave them grafted in? And we've all been through those decisions in our life. Where we sit there and we say, you know what? This just isn't the place for you. Right now. And a lot of times that's what Paul's saying. God is kind and loving, and he shows up because of that kindness, but he's also going to have an expectation. And that discipline is what allows us to be what we need to be to fulfill our mission in life. We don't ever fulfill that mission in life by accident. And one of the great Ortberg arguments in that book, which really kind of will close with this, is he says that Jesus had both too. He could have easily chosen the not go die on the cross leadership path. But he knew that he would not get off target. And he knew what the target was. He stayed on point. But certainly, and you see it all the time, right? That's the temptations, is all the things people are trying to pull him. They're trying to pull him off path. Peter's saying, no, you don't have to die. The devil saying you can do this. Everybody's trying to pull him off path. Right? But he doesn't move. He doesn't move a single degree on that path. So we're going to receive our offering this morning. And we're going to let you guys go enjoy it. A day that's not going to be over the 60s. Yes! And everyone who's not skinny, high five. Right? So let's close in prayer, and we're going to let you guys go enjoy a phenomenal day. And the Bears run a bye, so I have no emotion. All right. Father God, we just thank you so much for today. God, I pray your blessing over the offering and our time this week. God, I pray that we can stay on mission. I pray that we can embrace the sternness, the discipline that you bring into our lives. And know that we can't just keep wandering off without beginning to face consequences that you see because you love us enough to do it. So So God, I pray for a great week, great opportunities throughout our week to care for people, to show kindness, and God, to show leadership and direction in the lives of people around us. Pray your blessing over the offering. God, I pray that you bless those who are cheerful givers today. In your name, amen.